Hey everyone, Eric with Rockin' H. I've been putting together this tiny harvest crew just because I love T600s, I like T660s, and I really love this shade of red. This is Mike and Kathy Keimig, their harvesting outfit. That's the same color they use on their trucks. I really like it because of the flake in it, and it's shiny and it's just great looking. And I thought, what more could I add to this fleet? And I thought, why not make a T600 end dump truck pulling a pup? That would make a really cool addition to this fleet. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make us a T600 with an end dump bed, and we'll have it pull a 22-foot pup. Let's go to work.
All right, here's what we're going to start with. This is a Gearbox T600, and I'm going to start with one that I've already customized once, which is this truck right here. So this truck started out just like this one. You can see that it's got a hollow air dam, and you can cut that off and make a flat top really easy. There's also a video on my channel showing exactly how to do that and make this flat top. I've had this sitting on my shelf for quite a long time. You can see by the dust on here. It's been sitting around a while. All it is a stock gearbox that I just put DCP wheels on, repainted it, made it the flat top. So pretty easy custom overall. But I'm going to go ahead and strip this all the way down and repaint it the same color as the rest of them you've seen. And then we're going to stretch the frame and put this box on it, and then I'll put one of my 22-foot pups behind that. Since I reused the gearbox frame, this assembly is going to be pretty easy. All we do is take out the two screws that hold it to the frame. We'll get the frame sorted out a little bit later. I did go ahead and put some glue in here to hold this interior in, so we will have to cut that away. It will probably break pretty easy is my guess. It's been sitting on my shelf for at least a couple years. Guess I better be careful so I don't goof up my mirrors. Right now I'm just trying to do is just to break that glue with my flathead screwdriver. I started out with a knife as you saw, but I kind of like the screwdriver just a little better because the blade will not break like it will on the knife. There we go. And there we go. Awesome. Next we're going to take off these steps. We'll take off the mirrors and the air horns, and then the roof here, or these lights actually, they just push down and out. Of course, we got glue in there too, so we'll have to be careful that we don't break them. I put glue on the inside when I put this back together, so hopefully we'll just scrape that glue off. And then push them out with a sharp object. Just like that. There's one. Oh, maybe I'll grab it, or maybe I won't. Move to the driver's side. Now we'll see about this exhaust. Actually, we'll go ahead and take these mirrors off right away so we don't break those on disassembly, because if you break those mirrors, you don't have backups. Next, we'll cut away the glue behind the headlights. Normally, disassembly wouldn't be quite this challenging because from the factory, these are really simple to take apart. But since I already customized this once and used super glue, it's hard to know how those will come apart sometimes. So this is going to be real tricky because I know I probably put a bunch of glue behind this grill. So that's going to be that will be tricky. Let's see if we can get that apart. Hopefully we don't break it, because that would be not so good. Okay, that is not working at all. So what we'll do is we're going to try this. We're just going to try and pry it up with our knife. Can we do it? If worse comes to worse, I can always sacrifice this grill and use the one off my other donor, but I'd really like to not do that because that just makes this grill really expensive when you have to use one off of a brand new model. Okay. Another possibility is to set this in the freezer overnight, and then hopefully the cold air would make the glue brittle. But it looks like we got it off by prying. Excellent. And we didn't break it. Perfect. Perfect. All right. And now the trickiest part of the whole project, I think, is going to be our air horns, the windshield, and this part right here. Let's see how this goes. We're going to start by trying to cut the plastic, or the glue, I'm sorry. Okay, that's not working very well. Let's try a new way. What I think we'll try and do is just, there we go, push on these air horns like so. Perfect. And we didn't really ruin those or cause any terrible things to happen. Okay, now for some air horns. Now I'm not worried about the air horns because I do happen to have replacement air horns for 379 Peterbilt, so if these break, I know I can come back with something better, or at least something else. Managed to get one, perfect. Now let's see if we can get the other. There, got it. Next, the windshield is glued in place as well, but we can push this from the front to the back, and as you can see, pops right out. You'll notice that I had scored this at one point and mucked up the windshield a little bit, but for my purpose, I'm not too worried about that. So I said we're going to make this an end dump truck, so that means we have to make this a day cab. What we're going to do is cut right behind here, behind this cab, and this makes a nice clean line here for the sleeper, and then we'll come in and cut this line right here on the fairing and then up and out. Now you can use a variety of different tools for this. You could use a Dremel, you can use a bandsaw, you could use a handsaw. Anything is going to make this worth your while. Just depends on how long you have, how much time you want to spend cutting. For this particular cut, I'll be definitely using a small saw, and then in here as well. Alright, let's get to work. As luck would have it, I didn't turn on the camera when I made this first cut with my bandsaw. What I did was cut from the top, feeding into the blade. You can see I came down to just about this step, and then I'll continue with this little blade right here. Then I'm going to come in back here and then cut right along this edge. I will have to go ahead and sand this down and get rid of that. You could use a Dremel or any other abrasive cutting device to go ahead and get rid of this. And the reason for that is, if I don't, see how that is at an angle, I'm going to make an uneven cut where I want to make just a nice flat straight cut and use this as my guide. That way I make a nice clean cut right along that fender skirt. One thing to be aware of, depending on how tall your blade is, you might run into the top of the cab. See here, I can't cut any deeper than that right there, and I could actually go down another millimeter if I wanted to. I'm going to be chill for right now and leave this alone. I'm going to go ahead right now, I'll go and sand this down and get this flush so we can make this cut, and then we'll work on the tedious part of getting this cut down here so we have that fender skirt cut out well. To remove this part of the die cast, I'm going to use my cutoff wheel and my Dremel, and that should get it zipped off real quick. Well, I did it again. I went ahead and cut the sleeper off using this coping saw here, and you would have been able to see me turning this blade and kind of getting around this little hump in the die cast here. Now, if you wanted to, a nice, clean, easy way to do this would have been to make a straight cut all the way down using this cab as your guide. You could have cut through this fender skirt and then made this cut right here along this along this fender skirt, and then just cut all of this out, made a nice clean cut, and then not had to use a coping saw to get in here and cut the way I did. For some reason I was wed to keeping this raised square box of die cast on the back of on the top of the fender skirt, and so used the coping saw to go ahead and make that cut. Wasn't really hard, didn't actually take too long. It only took about 3-4 minutes and it was done. Now I'm using this file right here because you can see we have all sorts of jagged edges from our cut. We're going to get rid of those, and I'm using the file to do it. Plus, using the file, I can also make sure that this is nice and clean and get this evened up as well. As I'm pulling this file across this die cast, I'm filing this top edge right here with the side of this file. So I'm trying to clean that up and this up, along with cleaning all this up at the same time with every stroke. Okay, I want to stop on that side. Now I'm going to start. Now, this side of the die cast is still a bit jagged. It's not wonderful, and you can see it's just got a little bit of a tilt even, as this is obviously thicker, this is thinner, so you can take this part off a lot faster than you can up here. We're going to take a look at that, and I think what I'm going to do is work real hard to get that a little shorter and clean up that line right there. Alright, I think I'm pretty happy with this. We have just a tiny curve right here on the driver's side. Passenger side looks really, really good. I'm going to leave this just the way it is. I'm going to go ahead and take my file right here on this edge. I'm going to clean up this little button here from the cutting and even these two fender skirts out. Okay, this is happiness right here. You can see I got rid of that little button left over from the cutting job. I've evened up. There's just a wee bit of an angle right here at the bottom of that, back into that fender skirt. This one looks nice and square. This is going to be great. Our next step is to strip the paint. This is lacquer thinner. As you can see, it's stripped a whole lot of die cast because it's really dirty. Paint should really come up fairly quickly on this. It seems like whenever I do repaints, that paint comes up a lot easier than the factory paint. So I'm going to let this chill overnight, and then I'm going to come back, strip it down, and then we can seal up the back of the cab. The cab is stripped with all its paint. I took a wire wheel and cleaned up, shined up all the metal just to make it look nice. Took a knife and kind of scraped out some of the loose stuff in the inside. I will go ahead and take compressed air or dip this in rubbing alcohol to get any of the loose pieces that are still hanging around on the inside. Compressed air works really well for that if you have one. What we'll do now is we'll go ahead and close up the back of this cab. I'm going to go ahead and use styrene plastic. You can see that's just a millimeter thick or so. Lay that on the back of that and glue it in place. My habit is to cut this oversized, so what I do then is trim it away and then use a rotary wheel with a sanding disc on it to clean up the edges. You know, rough cut away all the big chunks and then go ahead and then sand the edges smooth. You can use a file or another tool to accomplish the same task. Now, you don't have to use plastic. If you've got a piece of brass you can stick on the back of this, you could put a piece of brass there. You could actually cut away the die cast here and move it forward if you wanted to. That's another option. I mean, there's really no wrong way to do this. I would suggest using a piece, whatever material you choose to use something flat and smooth, give you a clean back. If you wanted to cut a window in there, you could certainly cut a window in there if you wanted to, or even use a window sticker. If you had a sticker, you could put that on there to give the appearance of a window. For my purpose, I'm not going to put that in there because the bed on this truck is going to be if I ever pose it in a dumping situation, it'll be rare. It'll just sit on my layout or on a shelf in the closed position. Matter of fact, if you wanted to make it really simple, you wouldn't even make the bed function. If you are pretty keen and pretty certain it's going to sit on a shelf, well, you don't even have to make it function then. And that'll just save you some time and effort. So there's lots of choices, and it really depends on the end use of the vehicle you're working on. Now that we have that out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started on closing up the back of this cab. So I'm going to cut that slightly bigger than my line. I'm using just regular scissor here. And I will go ahead and trim away some of this. That'll reduce the work we have to do later. I'm using my standard CA glue. This is for sale in my store if you happen to need a bottle. Oftentimes when I do this, I'll go ahead and I'll use JB Weld on the inside. I'm not going to do that this time, again, for the simple reason that this will it won't be played with. It's just going to sit mostly, and I'll move it periodically, show people when they stop by the lab. Okay, we'll let that dry. We do have some prep to do on the frame. One, we have to take the fifth wheel plate off. We need to take this deck plate off. I'm not certain I'm going to leave these tanks on or not. I haven't decided yet. I may just leave them. I'm going to do a wheel swap and put 2-hole buds on this just because I like the way those look. And we are going to see if we need to stretch this frame at all. And here is the mounting frame that the box will actually sit on. So we can dry fit this cab on the frame, and then we can dry fit this mounting frame and see yes, we are going to have to stretch this out about a 1/2 inch. Okay, well, we'll just let that relax right there, and we'll get to these other parts quick. This, as I recall, is just pressed in. We'll see if we can get this in with a knife. There we go. Perfect. So now we can put this in our parts bin and save it for another build someday. And then one thing you'll have to do too, if you're going to reuse this frame, well, you'll have to do this on any frame really. We'll have to cut some of this die cast out here so our hoist can function. Luckily though, we don't have to do this at this very second. We're going to go ahead and stretch the frame out, see how everything's going to sit together, and then we'll go ahead and do the frame. And we said we had to cut that out about a ½ inch. This is basically where this hoist is going to rest. And that hoist actually folds back to probably someplace in here, but like I said, we are going to stretch this out so we will have some gap there we can work with without having to cut out too much die cast. We'll see. The driver line will have to come out because it's going to be too short as soon as we stretch that frame. Here I have the frame cut in half. I did go ahead and make 2 initial cuts on both pieces. That way I could break it out and see kind of where I'm at as far as what else I need to remove. You can see that works really simple. As it turns out, 7/32 channel works really well. This is homemade. What I've done, and I have a video here on YouTube showing how to do this. I take 7/32 square tubing, I cut it in half. This I happen to sand just a little. I made the channel really shallow. That way I could go around a frame like this, and in like this situation for example, I can go ahead and make a hoist fit in between these frame rails. That's really important. I prefer in this kind of situation to use rectangular tubing, but there's no 7/32 rectangular tube available. So channel it is. We're not going to go ahead and stretch this frame just yet because we want to be able to dry fit our cab and get a precise length on the frame to make sure that everything is going to fit well together. So for this moment, we're just going to set all this off to the side and then we'll continue on our cab. We went ahead and closed up the back on the cab. We're going to go ahead and continue working on that by taking the styrene and cleaning up all these edges so we can prime and paint. You can go ahead and take your side cutter and cut away some of the big chunks of plastic like that. You can also use a knife like so. We don't want to gouge the plastic at all. That way we don't have any weird nicks or dings that we have to concern with. We're just going to shave some of that plastic off. Just like so. You could use a rotary tool for this part of the project with a sanding wheel on it. I'm just going to head and use a piece of sandpaper wrapped around my file like you see, and that will give us the look we're going for. That's really all there is to it. Notice we have nice smooth crisp lines all the way around, and there shouldn't be much of a seam. Now if there is a little bit of a seam on this particular project, I'm not too upset about it, mostly because again, for my purpose, this is mission accomplished and I'm satisfied with these results. Before I prime and paint, I want to make sure that the interior is going to fit inside of this cab. We've made this cab narrower. We've shortened it up, meaning that the interior will not fit the way it did before. One, it had a long flange that went into the sleeper that I've cut off already. Then see here where I have taken a sander and then shortened up, made this whole interior narrow. Even goofed up this seat on the driver's side a little bit in the process with heat, using a sander just to remove some plastic. But now it fits inside of this cab. This is important because this piece does serve as a spacer, or when you set the cab on the frame, you have a level frame going all the way across. The back of the cab here had a screw in it that also gave it support. There was a hole that the back of the cab set on and screwed into. That all worked together to make this cab sit level on the frame. So we will have to be ready for that when the time comes. In the meantime, we can take compressed air, remove any of the flakes and leftover paint that didn't come out or was scraped, any of the material left over from sanding. Now's a good time to also take a small drill and clean out any holes where mirrors and steps and things will attach. That's important to do right now so you don't scratch up paint when you go back to assemble. If you've never done that before, it's just a good practice. It sure does help quite a bit in cleaning out holes, residue, glue, anything that might get in the way when you go back to assemble these mirrors and steps. That helps just a great bit. What I like to do prior to painting is to rub my die cast down with rubbing alcohol. A lot of times I just dip it in this jar, and this is just 99% isopropyl alcohol. Buy it at any discount store for a couple of dollars. It was a little harder to come by during the pandemic, but now it's back on the shelf and easy to get. And just whatever isopropyl alcohol you can find is going to be adequate. The goal here is to remove any fingerprints, any oils, any residues, any weird stuff that may be on the die cast, just anything that'll inhibit the primer from sticking really well to the die cast. Once I have it rubbed down, my goal is not to handle it much, so again, anything on my fingers doesn't come off on the die cast. If you wanted to, rubber gloves will prevent anything from getting on the die cast. Now we're ready to prime and paint. Then I put the red metallic on top. I shot clear after the paint was dry. Then I put a decal on right down here, a Kenworth decal where it's supposed to be on the fender, and shot another coat of clear. This thing's ready to go together. I went ahead and cut the channel and painted it flat black. The channel is about 1.25 inches. And if you don't recall from earlier in the video, I said this is 732. And it's just a piece of square tubing I cut in half and then sanded down a little bit thinner just to make sure the valley was nice and thin so my hoist can go in between the two pieces once the frame's together. The way we'll proceed from here is we will go ahead and assemble the cab. We're going to screw to the frame and level it up to make sure that part's good. Then we will go ahead and then join the two pieces of frame together. That way we can make sure that we get the correct distance between the cab and the back of the frame. The bed is assembled except for the tarp frame. That way it'll just drop on the frame once we have it assembled. This time I'm going to use Formula 560 canopy glue. This dries clear and does not leave any glue haze, so you can use it liberally and there's no fear that it'll show up on a windshield or any part of clear plastic. The only reason I'm using this, I'll also use my favorite MaxiCure Ultra Thick as well, but the reason to use this time is just in case I have a notion to take this thing apart. It will be easier because this is a water-based glue. So I like to go ahead and just put a couple of drops over on a piece of plastic and then use a knife to get it exactly where I want. We're going to go ahead and start with that on the grill. That'll be the easiest thing to put together. Does this stuff work? Will it make your parts stick for a long, long time? Yes, it will. I've often called this glue Elmer's on steroids. The difference between this and Elmer's is it dries nice and clear. This will take substantially longer to dry than a super glue if that's what you're used to using, especially because you cannot use any accelerant like you can with standard super glue. It will just have to dry of its own accord, and it does take time. You'll notice I'm also wearing rubber gloves. This is just to keep my fingers from touching the paint and accidentally putting a fingerprint in the paint. The clear coat on here is not fully cured. If this was cured for a couple of days out here in the lab, or at least a day, I wouldn't hesitate using bare hands, but I shot this earlier today. It's touch dry, but I, again, just don't want to leave any fingerprints in the... Do just a little bit more cleanup on these cab lights so there's no room for error here. There. Now they should go in just even better. And this time around, I think what I'll do is I'll start with these first and then put the windshield in afterward. Excellent. I'm pretty generous with the Formula 560. As I said, it'll dry clear and it is water based, so there's no chance of glue haze. Word of caution, as I've mentioned already, these parts are kind of delicate as far as being able to be handled. If you happen to roll this on its top, these will push out because that glue is going to take some time to dry. So we do want to be careful as we handle this from here out. Now we'll go ahead and put in the side steps. On this gearbox cab, there's kind of a top and bottom on these little steps. You can see this little lip right here, and the pegs are coming out. Well, this little lip actually hangs over this bottom part of the die cast. So this smooth part up here is the top, and there's a little angle there that will actually fit in over here. And there's two different steps, by the way. There's a top and a bottom step. And I'm kind of handling this one here with my knife. I'm going to flip it over. There we go. You can see the smooth side and then an angle. Well, the angle goes toward the back of this step right here. So you can see this one is actually the passenger side, and here is the driver's side. One thing too, if you choose to go ahead and use Formula 560 on a lid like I'm doing, you will have to go ahead and freshen that up periodically. As I said, it does take a while to dry, but if it's warm in the environment you're working in, it will kind of get a sticky, I don't know, it kind of seals itself because it starts to dry out. So you just need to freshen it up. But luckily, we're not using a whole lot here. So if you happen to waste a little, it's not a big problem. There we go. And as you recall at the beginning, or excuse me, when I had the die cast stripped down, I took a drill and drilled all the holes out to clear out any odd glue and paint and whatever other obstructions might be in there. Also, when in doubt, if you're worried about how things are going to fit, dry fit before you go ahead and do your assembly. That will ensure that everything's going to go together smoothly and easily. That'll also, if you have some sort of obstruction, you're not having to try and fit something together when you've got wet glue in the way, which can get over other parts of your die cast and just generally cause trouble. So if you have any doubts at all about the way your truck is going together, and this goes for any die cast project you're working on, dry fit it. Yes, it does take just a wee bit more time, but it will be worth it if you're in doubt. And there we go. We have air horns and mirrors, which I'm going to save for closer to the end after this glue is dry, just so I don't bump something and cause a problem. And as I put my interior in, I can see that it's causing a little trouble with my windshield. I don't like that. So before I get too far, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can push that back in without causing any problems. So you have just a little gap right there, which I'm not real keen on, but I think it's going to be okay. Next, we'll just take a little test here and see how this is going to come together. I've mentioned prior that you're going to need a spacer in here, and it looks like my interior is going to serve as the spacers that I'm going to be needing. What we're looking for is straight lines here in the die cast against this frame. So what we're going to do, and this is going to be difficult to see in the camera, so you're just going to have to take my word for it, for lack of a better idea. We're just going to dry fit this frame together and just see how we're getting along. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these frame rails on and try not to lose my religion in the process. I almost need a couple extra hands. And I'm just going to take an overall view from the back about how this cab is sitting on the frame, how it's looking. Do I need to move it? Does it need to twist or move in some capacity to make sure that everything is looking level and perfect? Just so you can see what I'm trying to accomplish here, this is the mounting frame that is right here on the bed. What I'm doing is I'm just giving you a bird's eye view of what it looks like or how long your frame stretch should be. So I told you my channel iron here, or C-iron, or however you want to call it, I told you that's 1.25 inches long, which stretches out my truck to make this little pivot point kind of fall right off the back of this frame, which is exactly where I want it. And then you can see we have just a little space here at the front of the cab, so the bed's not going to hit the cab, but there won't be much room between the bed and the cab. That's the way this is designed to work together. Now we're going to take it apart and put the frame rails on. Here I'm using my CA glue, which is my preferred glue for most things. If you followed me very long, you'll know I'm a huge fan of it. I like it. Now, I'm not being very precise at this very moment. We do have some time to work with this, so we can be careful but take our time at the same time. Okay, I'm not putting just an overabundance of glue, because if I put too much on, it's going to squish out and then we'll have a mess. Because this room is pretty warm, this stuff is going to dry really quick. When you get the wheels, you'll notice that there's no center hole drilled through. There's a hole in the back of the hub, but not all the way through. And I want my axle to go through this and into this wheel. So you'll need to drill that out. Now you don't have to drill it out, but I like to because it gives your wheels just a little more strength. I'm using a 3/64 bit, which matches the axle size. I went ahead and drilled the others already. Now we're ready to go ahead and put them together. There is a notch on this wheel right here. You can see there's a notch that matches the notch on the inside dual. As a matter of practice, after I've dry fit, make sure everything works right, I like to take just a little bit of super glue and put it on the inside hub. This will cause problems when you decide to take them apart, or maybe you want to swap these tires out and put something else in. But for my purpose, this is going to work great. There, popped in place. As I mentioned, I'm very certain that that axle is way too long for what we're doing here. Not a problem, we can always trim it down. We're going to need to trim that down quite a little bit. We'll take a 1/4 inch off and see how we go. That metal is nice and soft, so it should pop out right nice. You'll notice I'm not putting super glue on yet. Eric, why aren't you doing that? Well, I am a dry fitting kind of guy. I want to make sure all of this is going to work before I go ahead and pour concrete. And I'm pleased with what I have here. And I'm going to turn that until the notches line up. There we go. Perfect. Perfect. One thing you might keep in mind too on these particular axles, these come from Canada Dakota. They're sold in my store. That axle is smaller in diameter than DCP, substantially smaller, probably by half. So if you're going to use them, keep in mind that the axle diameter can change the height of the rear end. Not by much, but just so you're aware that it can happen. Nice. And we will also cut about a 1/4 inch off this one as well. And now that we know it's going to work, we will go ahead and glue this one right away. Okay, that piece is done. Now, since it's been a few minutes since we've glued that together, that glue should be dry and we can go ahead and attach our bed. Let's go and get on it. What I'm going to do is extend it, and then I'm going to work it in between this frame, being careful not to press too hard. We're not going to force anything. If it doesn't slide easy, we're going to get creative and do something different. Now, this has been dry fit a couple of times, but you know, whenever you dry fit and then you handle your models and do things, things can change. So it's just always good to not force things. When you gotta force it, that's generally when you break it, or at least it's when my experience. Now, whenever you come into a problem where you can't get your hoist to fit, you have a couple of choices. You can actually take die cast off the inside here. That's perfectly fine. You can use a rotary tool, you can use a file, or you can go ahead and cut this piece of plastic off of the hoist on both sides. Now, we don't want to get into this vertical piece, but this horizontal piece right here, you can cut that, nip that off, and then that will give you some room to squeeze this together. Once you squeeze it together, you can trim this peg right here up a little bit, and then it will fit in between your rails. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, but I think I bent this piece of die cast when I went back together, and now I can't unbend it. It's done. So we have a dilemma. Which option shall we choose? I think I might shave a little bit out with my Dremel. Now, if you look along the bottom of that, between my mounting frame and the frame of the truck, we have a noticeable gap, at least 1/16 of an inch. What's going on there? Well, as it turns out, we could probably, with the hoist extended, I think we can go ahead and make that work with the hoist extended. So what's happening here is the back of the hoist is bumping up against this die cast right here. Okay, not a worry. With our Dremel, we can go ahead and remove some of that die cast right here and get rid of that obstruction. Okay, if I go ahead and push the bed clear up against the cab, that does remove some of that gap and gives me just a little more space. But I think we can go ahead and take some more off. Right at the front, right above the fuel tanks, there's some plastic that's in our way. This plastic right here is actually raising the nose of my mounting frame. My mounting frame is setting on it. Now, you would have a couple of options to mitigate this problem. You can actually put a piece of plastic in here and raise the whole thing, or you can come in here and then cut some of that plastic out and then cut it right here and then remove the plastic so the mounting frame can sit flush. For this project, what I'm going to do is take the cab off of the frame. That way we have plenty of room to work, and we don't have to worry about our grinding wheel bumping up against our freshly painted cab, because that would be horribly annoying. Okay, now we're good to go. Now, these tanks are probably going to sit in here and fit really weird. They're going to be loose for now. This is just part of the process of putting things back together when you are doing something new. Things pop up, they're in the way, you got to get them out. So we ground off that rivet, we got rid of all that plastic, our bed should sit nice and flat, and our cab can go back together now. We can glue our fuel tanks in anytime. We're going to get this cab sitting perfect and then make sure that our bed is sitting right, and then we'll go ahead and glue these fuel tanks in. Now, let's see how we did. Much better. That is looking fantastic. That is good. That is very good. What I'm going to do is put a little bit of glue right here on this plastic in front of the fuel tanks. And that way they will stay in place. Then I'm going to put a little bit of glue right down these frame rails, right where our bed is going to set. Next, I'm going to turn this upside down so I can see from the rear that it's sitting square on the frame, front and back. Now that I'm confident with the job we've done, I'll go ahead and take some accelerant and place it on the frame. Again, I'm not being generous with it, putting just enough on there to keep it so it doesn't come off. And then we're going to look at our cab, make sure we got it square. The windshield's not fitting quite perfectly. For this particular job, I'm not too worried about it. If this was one I was selling to a client, I would go ahead and fix that up a little bit better, but then again, I wouldn't have used this particular windshield because it's marked up. Now that I'm confident that the bed's not going to come off, I'm going to glue the fuel tanks in permanently. I'm going to use this glue bottle here just to hold the top of the cab up because I don't want, even though it's been a while here, I'm fairly confident that the cab lights won't come out. I don't want to tempt fate, so I'm just going to prop it up just so those cab lights don't accidentally pop out and then we have to start over and be unhappy. Okay, I want to make sure that those are level. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to put some glue right down in here. I'm going to use just a little bit more so it'll run down that tank. And I put it in a spot where you're not going to see it. And a little CA glue just to keep it tight. And then we're going to come over here on this side. And this one's being a little bit stubborn, not a problem. There we go. Okay, I think we're running into something. There we go. Perfect. Now that we've come this far, if I had to do it over again, I would have pulled the fuel tanks completely out, cut them down, and then stuck them in there after the fact. That would have been the really easier, better way to do that part of this project. Next, we can go ahead and put our mirrors and our air horns in. Okay, there's a little bit of obstruction there. So I'm going to go ahead and use my 3/64 bit and clean out that hole. Okay, that one is not going in there quite as smoothly and easily as I'd like, so I'm going to just wiggle that out. try the other side. And it's not going in that side very well either. So I think what I might do on this one, I just cut that pin off so it's clear out of the way. This won't be a problem. I'm going to use a little bit of Formula 560 to hold it in place. Now we'll go back to the passenger side where it will fit perfectly now. There. Now it's straight. Now we'll try the other air horn on the driver's side. Let's see if we get that one to go in. And that one pops right in. Okay. Here's my one complaint with Formula 560. Because it takes a little while to dry in situations like right now, where the top pin is kind of worked, it's broken, it's missing, you gotta hold that in place, and because it's warm in here, it does seem to dry a lot faster, but still gotta hold it in place until you're completely confident it's not coming off, or at least it's not going to fall off of its own accord. You'll have to bump it. What I did right there was there's a little bit of glue around that pin, so I just went ahead and knocked that off. Luckily it came off easy, and that one's going together very, very nicely. For this particular project, I'm going to see how some different style of pipes will work on here. The original pipe was just a long turnout that went over the top of the cab, and you can see I cut it down to be a miter. So I'm kind of curious. We're just going to just do a quick practice here and see how this is going to look. This is my 3D printed turnout with round muffler. I do not expect the mounting pins to fit these holes. We'll see what we get. And actually, I think I kind of like that. Okay, I think I'm going to use these. So what I'll do is I'm going to leave these pins on. I'm going to go shoot some silver spray paint on them and then stick that on there. I'll cut these pins off after they're painted, and then I can kind of make it so that turnout shoots out to the side of the cab a little bit, and that'll look cool. Alright, that'll work great. It's been my vision that this truck would be pulling a pup, and I need to put a hitch on this thing so I can pull the pup. What I've done here is I took a piece of 1/4-inch square tubing, I cut it down to just a made up length. It's like, oh, that looks long enough, let's use that. Then I cut out the front, drilled a hole in it, and put a piece of plastic rod in there. The way the pup that I'm going to use fits is it does have a ring for a pinto hitch, so I've just made something that the ring can fit over. I went ahead and used a black Sharpie to go ahead and paint the whole thing black, and we'll just glue it to the bottom of the truck. You'll notice this part is white, which will be against the truck. So we use a little bit of glue here. We'll pick up our cab, and we're going to put it right here. Perfect. Looks to be in the center. Now we'll use some accelerant to go ahead and glue it in place. Awesome. Done. Now we're ready for a pup. The exhaust we got to put on yet, and then do a double check and see that everything is coming together nicely, and then we're off and running.